It's Thursday, the 4th of November 2021. Welcome to Fear and Greed, the business podcast that sets you up for a successful day. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Michael.
Relations between France and Australia hit new lows. That's our main story today. Also this morning, the UN Climate Change Summit tries to cut methane, the humble chicken schnitzel offered as a reward for getting vaccinated, and the once great AMP finally leaves the life insurance business. Then stay listening for Sean's chat to Tanya Plibersek, federal opposition spokesperson on education and women. But first, Sean, Prime Minister Scott Morrison returns from the United Nations Summit in Glasgow somewhat red-faced about the blow-up with France.
He sure does. He took a flight overnight, but on a stopover in Dubai, he tried to play down what has become a diplomatic embarrassment for the Prime Minister. It's all about the French President, Emmanuel Macron, saying he didn't think he knew Mr. Morrison lied to him about Australia's plans to cancel a $90 billion submarine contract with Naval Group from France. Then US President Joe Biden called Mr. Morrison's handling of the subs issue clumsy. Yesterday, Mr. Morrison said it was time to get on with it and build the subs to ensure Australian defences were in the best shape they could be. But this story is not going away. French Ambassador Jean-Pierre Thibault said Australia's reputation had been damaged when speaking at the National Press Club in Canberra yesterday. And I quote, "The way this Australian government decided to turn its back on our solemn and far-reaching partnership without ever frankly consulting with France when there were countless opportunities, is just out of this world." He also backed Mr. Macron's allegations and said the leaking of private messages between the two leaders was an unprecedented low.
Yeah, the text message between Mr. Macron and Mr. Morrison that was leaked, that seems to be really what's upsetting the French at the moment.
It is, and it's not a good look when the leader of a country or his staff leaks the contents of a text with another world leader. Yesterday, Mr. Morrison claimed the message shows that he'd informed Mr. Macron and releasing the text was necessary given the French president's statements. Normally, Australian leaders that head overseas and share the stage with other dignitaries get a pretty good bump back home. I don't think this has happened this time. It's been a really poor showing from Mr. Morrison, not aided, of course, by former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull jumping in yesterday saying Mr. Morrison had a reputation for lying. It's certainly a black eye for Australia's international relations. China has already jumped on board, saying the Morrison government needs to honestly face up to international concerns about its sub-deal with the US and UK. It's definitely not the Prime Minister's finest moment. What a mess.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty fair assessment. So how did markets perform yesterday?
Well, the S&P ASX 200 rose almost 1% to finish at 7,392 points. Materials, financials and consumer staples were the best performing sectors, while information technology was the worst. The Aussie dollar is weaker this morning, trading around 74.5 US cents. Oil and gold prices have also pulled back just a touch. Wall Street was mixed after the US Federal Reserve said it will begin winding back its monthly asset purchases. That's the first step in withdrawing support for the economy that was introduced during the pandemic. The central bank was also slightly less certain that the current jump in inflation was transitory, saying supply and demand imbalances related to the pandemic and the reopening of the economy had contributed to sizable price increases in some sectors. European markets were also mixed overnight. The European Central Bank also met, and President Christine Lagarde said it was very unlikely that an ECB rate hike will happen in 2022. The Bank of England is due to meet tonight. And Michael, today's feature commodity is, wait for it, cotton. Cotton is trading at 10-year highs. Why? Because modern slavery legislation out of the United States has meant buyers and manufacturers are staying away from the Xinjiang region in China, and that region produces about 20% of the world's cotton. Also, US cotton regions have been hit by hurricanes and dry weather. This is happening as local cotton farmers in Australia are experiencing their best growing season in many years, following the disastrous season 2 years ago when production hit a 37-year low. In short, cotton needs water, and in Australia, the drought culled crops, but recent rains have revitalised the sector. So, whereas 2 years ago, Australia produced 600,000 bales of cotton, this year it's expected to grow 2.5 million bales. And given there's a global shortage, prices are high, great news for cotton farmers.
Okay, so far we've had oats, canola, palm oil, and now cotton. You really are working your way through the commodities, aren't you?
Absolutely. Wait for next week. It's a very exciting one.
I'm looking forward to it. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, there's plenty of stories around this morning. COP26 continues in Glasgow, even though Scott Morrison, as you mentioned, has returned home. After the first couple of days, it looks like it's starting to get down now to the more nitty-gritty of the issues.
That's right. The first couple of days tend to include grandiose statements and lots of photo opportunities. Officially, it's been the 2-day World Leaders Summit. That's over now. There's plenty of discussions and negotiations now going on, and after about 2 weeks, we'll get a final communique. As you mentioned, Mr. Morrison has come home, so too Joe Biden, the US president. But over the last 24 hours, there were some big announcements. Yesterday, we heard from Mr. Biden. He said he wants to cut methane emissions by 30% this decade. More than 100 countries have backed that plan, though Australia isn't one. The big win for President Biden was getting Brazil's signature. China, Russia and India haven't signed up, however. Mr. Biden also scolded China, Saudi Arabia and Russia's leaders for not turning up at the conference. The UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said China's President Xi Jinping is being pushed to accelerate China's target for starting to cut emissions from 2030 to 2025, and Western nations agreed to provide South Africa with $8.5 billion to transform into a clean energy economy, while Japan's new Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, said his country will provide $10 billion for developing nations. Really interesting how much focus there has been on South Africa particularly and other developing nations this time round.
Yeah, sounds like there's starting to be a bit of progress there. Back home now, Sean, and I mentioned this one at the top of the show, Queenslanders that get vaccinated can get a $10 voucher for a chicken schnitzel.
Yes, the world's a funny place when governments are offering schnitty vouchers to encourage people to get vaccinated. But that's exactly what Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk did yesterday.
Do you reckon it comes with chips?
Always. Well, it's actually a $10 voucher, so it depends where you go. But some of those clubs up in Queensland, I reckon you'd get a schnitty and chips for under $10. It's all part of the Premier's efforts to get as many vaccinations rolled out in Queensland ahead of the summer holidays. There was another unusual COVID event yesterday. Western Australia Premier Mark McGowan, by far the most recalcitrant leader of the states, downgraded New South Wales' extreme risk classification to high risk. Maybe he's softening, Michael. Maybe. I doubt it. New South Wales reported 190 new COVID-19 cases yesterday and 4 deaths. Over 88% of the state is now fully vaccinated. Victoria had its second successive day of less than 1,000 cases. There were 941 cases recorded and 8 deaths. The 7-day average is now down about 25% over the past week. Let's hope it keeps heading that way.
Yes, indeed. Now, BHP announced yesterday that it's in discussions with Andrew Forrest's Wyloo Metals about their separate takeover bids for Canadian nickel company Noront Resources. What's all this one about?
Well, no one really expected it, but that's exactly what's happening. Andrew Forrest and BHP are talking about Noront Resources, which they're both bidding for. Now, the region in Canada where Noront Resources is located is nickel-rich, and that's a key battery metal. The fact that the big Australian is talking civilly to a key competitor is significant and highlights the potential of battery metal companies. When you listen to the talk out of the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow and the push by investors for carbon neutral stocks, you start to understand why battery metal companies are in the midst of a super cycle. They bounce around a lot, but the share prices of lithium, nickel, copper and rare earths companies have had a great time in recent months. Yesterday, Orocobre was the second best performer among the top 200, up 6.5%. That's more than 20% in the past month. Other strong performers were Pilbara Minerals and Mineral Resources. All three are lithium miners.
Sean, a fairly momentous occasion. AMP has finally, after more than 170 years, left the life insurance industry.
Yes, Michael, it began as the Australian Mutual Provident Society in 1849 with the goal of supporting families in sickness and death. It has an incredibly rich history, but yesterday announced it would divest its 19% equity interest in Resolution Life Australasia for about $500 million. Now, last year, AMP sold the bulk of its life insurance business for about $3 billion. So Australia's great life insurance company is in life insurance no more. It really is a monumental moment for the once blue-chip insurer and wealth manager, which has fallen on very tough times in recent years, much of it of its own making. It was the great financial advisory company not so long ago, but poor strategy, poor corporate behaviour, Changes in the superannuation and advice markets and a surge in competitors made AMP a shadow of its once great self. In fact, 20 years ago, Michael, AMP's share price was around $14. Its share price back then tended to track the market due to its massive investment portfolio. But post-Royal Commission, it has slowly divested itself of its life business and many of its tied financial planners. Now it's primarily a wealth manager, and even that part of the business is being broken up. It's also a bank. As I said, 20 years ago, its share price was $14. 2 months ago, it hit 91 cents. Now, it has bounced since then. It's up about 30%, but the one-time blue chip company's future is very unclear.
Okay, Sean, what's making headlines in today's news media?
Well, the Financial Review is reporting that companies are offering 20% plus pay rises to snap up investment bankers, lawyers, marketing executives, accountants, construction managers, and sustainability and risk specialists. And none of those are lowly paid to begin with. And in cyberspace, there's a remarkable level of demand with salary increases of between 25 to 30% to attract talent. The Australian is reporting that the competition regulator has warned that the economic recovery from the pandemic could be derailed and inflation driven higher by a supply chain squeeze hitting the nation's ports. That's creating a nightmare for business. When ships arrive in Sydney, Melbourne or Brisbane, they're met with some of the most inefficient and slowest stevedoring operators in the world, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission says in a new report. And finally, Michael, the Financial Times is reporting that China plans to quadruple its nuclear stockpile by 2030. According to the Pentagon and the United States, it would mean China would have at least 1,000 warheads by the end of the decade.
Running through some of the other stories around today, Telstra said it has renewed its contract with the Australian Department of Defence, signing a 5-year deal worth more than $1 billion to provide tech solutions. It includes the introduction of Telstra's 5G mobile network capability for defence personnel.
Amcor, which is the world's biggest packaging company and is listed on the ASX, has cut back supplies to some of its lower margin customers as a result of raw material shortages. Specialist resins, PET plastic and aluminium shortages have hurt Amcor's output. Now, the group announced a 2% jump in net profit for the September quarter yesterday, and boss Ron Delia said he'd had to make tough decisions about who was getting Amcor products, and low margin sales went first. No surprises there.
The number of dwellings approved during September fell by 4.3% following a big jump in August. The trend has been down ever since the withdrawal of government support packages earlier in the year, according to the Bureau of Statistics. The big shift has really been from freestanding dwellings to apartments, where approvals are stronger.
And finally, Michael, the share price of payment solutions group Tyro Payments, which is chaired by former Telstra boss David Thodey, fell more than 15% yesterday, which was the day of its AGM. Overhanging the stock are claims relating to outages back in January. Now, Mr. Thodey said the vast majority of those claims have been settled, but there's still 7% outstanding. The company also failed to provide profit guidance. That didn't impress investors, and at one point its share price was down 22% before, as I said, finishing 15% lower.
Yeah, not a good day. What's the key overseas news this morning?
The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has supported the use of Pfizer and BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine in children aged 5 to 11. That's the first major economy to do that and really will lead the way. New Zealand's unemployment rate has fallen to its lowest level in almost 14 years, 3.4%, down from 4%, sending the New Zealand dollar higher. The rate is now the lowest on record, contributing to inflation in the country. Part of the reason for the labour pressures is the hard border imposed by New Zealand during COVID. Now, these figures came as the Reserve Bank of New Zealand said the transition to living with COVID-19, which will include fewer government payments, will dampen economic growth. Yahoo will remove its suite of products from China, citing an increasingly challenging business and legal environment. It's the second big withdrawal from China in the past month, following Microsoft's LinkedIn network site's closure, citing the same issues. And finally, Michael, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that Nike has filed trademark applications that suggest it wants to sell digital versions of its shoes, clothing and other goods with the swoosh logo. There's already lots of people paying for digital designs and digital artworks, and we've spoken on Fear and Greed before about non-fungible tokens. Well, it looks like soon you'll be able to buy Nike gear in video games and other online platforms. Incredible. There is no boundary to what you can sell.
This is going to make me sound really old, but what will they think of next? This is extraordinary.
Yes, Mum, thanks.
Up next is the Daily Interview, Sean, and today you're talking to Labor frontbencher Tanya Plibersek.
Yes, we discussed everything from climate change policy, the pandemic and the economy, through to who exactly does the washing in her household.
I think it's fair to say it is quite a wide-ranging conversation. It's a really interesting chat. That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Thursday, the 4th of November, 2021. Make sure you're following the podcast, join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter and Facebook, and sign up for our free daily newsletter at fearandgreed.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.